Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Sinrod. I'm with the law firm Duane Morris. I'm based in San Francisco. We're international around the world. And I'm joined, as always, on this Tech Law 10, where information technology meets the law, with my friend and colleague, my partner in crime, not crime, Jonathan Armstrong in England. And Jonathan, you're thinking about AI literacy? I know you're a literate person. What do you have to say to start us off?
I am. Thanks very much, Eric. And I'm Jonathan.Armstrong at Punter Southall.law. Great to speak with you. Well, I think from my perspective, AI literacy, it has hit the news quite a lot in the past few weeks. And some of it is focused on the legal profession and some of it not. Now, starting with the legal profession, we've had some hallucination cases again in the UK. Hallucination cases aren't new. There are many around the world. These are cases where people appear in court with a list of cases, only some of which exist. But it seems as if the courts in England and Wales have certainly lost patience with that. And there have been stern words for law firms and legal professionals that they ought to do better, and that effectively the courts want law firm leaders to train everybody in their group. And if they don't, then they're likely to face sanctions, which the courts say could, in extreme circumstances, include people being reported to the police, and that could lead to unlimited jail terms. But AI literacy, I think, is a wider topic, in part because of the EU AI Act. Now, we've talked about this before, and we've talked about the fact that some of its provisions are staggered. So the full effects of the Act are not yet in, but the literacy provisions came in on the 2nd of February 2025. And we've just had last month some FAQs from the European Commission on what the literacy obligations mean. Now, for those people who like to follow these things through, that's Article 4 of the EU AI Act. And it's important to remember that there are extraterritoriality provisions in the Act as well. So, US corporations, for example, if they use AI that could touch the EU or people in the EU, will also have to comply with these provisions. Now, the FAQs stress, as you would imagine, frequent and specific training on AI risks, something we've been doing with businesses recently, where you look at AI risks, but also AI opportunities, and develop mechanisms for assessing those risks. The FAQs say that relying on AI providers to do this for you is unlikely to be sufficient. So, if, for example, your team's using AI for recruiting, you can't rely on the recruiters to meet your literacy obligations. They talk about common failings like hallucination that we've just discussed. And it's important to remember that the Article 4 obligations extend to providers and deployers. So it's not just those people developing AI, it's those deploying it as well. So in my scenario, for example, the HR team that's deploying a recruitment, resume filtering solution or whatever, as well as the provider. And literacy involves, quote, skills, knowledge, and understanding. So you've got to develop those skills within your teams, again, through training, through reinforcing that training. And the FAQs suggest that you should have a training record specifically dedicated to AI training so that you can pull that up if a regulator asks. And the obligation is to ensure that, quote, persons dealing with the operation and use of AI systems are AI literate. So, depending on your company, that could include contractors, could include employees, service delivery providers, maybe even the sales channel. And it won't usually be sufficient to rely on manuals, systems instructions, and that sort of thing. Now, it's important to remember that some of the enforcement mechanisms are not yet in place, but Article 4 provision can also be enforced through civil action as well. And I think that's another sort of climactic development that we've had with AI. So, for example, the Max Schrems organization that we talked about before has 877 cases, I think, that they have brought since their foundation. They're not all AI related, but some of them are, and they include, for example, a class action against Meta over training data, where Article 4 could be one of the pillars of such legislation. We've obviously got concerns about AI and its place in the world. Obviously, some issues around data transfer at the moment, whether different jurisdictions are regarded as safe, and AI related investigations in places like Italy, South Korea, Japan, into DeepSeek, for example. Um, there's concerns over AI devices and the data gathered by devices. So things like the allegations against Chinese providers of equipment, which have surfaced again today as we're recording this. But we've looked frequently at things like facial recognition, which combined with AI, combined with hardware that's manufactured outside of your home jurisdiction, can lead to potential issues in all sorts of ways, including the forthcoming EU Data Act. And then again, there's these issues that we've talked about before about hidden AI in recruitment, about lack of board skills, about the increasing complexity of AI. You know, we talked about agentic AI in an earlier podcast, which is a much more complicated beast than things like Gen AI. And then coupled with that, that whole issue of personal liability for individuals. You know, if there are civil remedies and if individuals have not been trained properly, where does that lead in terms of litigation? So I think literacy at a first cut seems like an easy and relatively self-contained topic, but I think it's becoming more complex, and as a result, companies, organizations are having to develop a program to deal with literacy that will satisfy regulators or courts that they've done all that they can to educate themselves, their employees, and those around them. Some thoughts,
Brilliant.
Eric?
Brilliant as always. You covered a lot of the waterfront, but there's more, and I'll try to supplement this way, if I may. So, of course, you talked about how training for lawyers is important. You talked about advising businesses regarding risks having to do with AI, and I'll bring it home this way and talk about AI literacy that I deal with in terms of university students, because you know I'm
Oh,
also a professor at two universities in addition to practicing law, and when I deal with AI literacy for the students, these are the young adults coming up. They're the future, right? They're going to be living with this probably longer than we will. Um, Not only do we talk about how to use AI, and they're pretty facile at finding it and using it, how not to cheat, but we cover some bigger picture items too, because it's very easy to do a search and you get a result and you feel like, well, there's information, it must be true. But what's really behind it? And we discuss, and there's so many of these issues I'm going to talk about that we could discuss at length some other time because this is a Tech Law 10, but we talk about biases that can be uh, shown or reflected through AI. Uh, Data privacy, clearly, misinformation and how that occurs and how to ferret that out, surveillance issues, whether the information is being surveilled as part of the use of AI. We talk about social change. How is AI used specifically to effectuate social change, either positively or negatively? What is the impact going to be on jobs and employment? Are humans going to be rendered somewhat irrelevant in certain contexts because AI will be taking over. We spent quite a bit of time talking about creativity. Uh, does AI in some ways interfere with original creative thought? Because people will just be more likely to go, do a search and information comes out and there it is, as opposed to reflecting and thinking and doing their own investigation and research. And then finally, this relates to that one, decision making. How much does AI impact actual human decision making, positively or negatively? And not only are these issues present and important for the young adults coming up in the university, but all the way through, but at every level of society, I believe. What do you think about those sub items?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, the point that I think is very, very interesting is about that whole generational differences. And of course, we're reaching the stage where the majority of the workforce in most of our organizations is going to be Gen Z. So, uh, so, so that whole digital native thing, I think, is really interesting. And there are studies that say that people who are of that age, without sounding too old, are more likely to use technology to find solutions, and that will include AI, and are most likely to bypass policies and procedures that we put in place to stop that happening. There's an LRN survey, for example, that says that. And so, how that translates is even if we ban AI in the workplace, it won't be banned. You know, a colleague came into London on a train and observed an individual with two laptops open. One seemed to be a work laptop, one seemed to be a personal laptop, obviously taking work related tasks from the work laptop, retyping them in their personal device, finding the answers from Gen AI, and then typing them back again. So even if we block Gen AI on our corporate systems, people will find a way around, whether that's by using their own device, whether that's using mobile. And generally speaking, a lot of the digital native entrants to the workforce are smarter at finding a way around the policies, just as rabbits can, bury around the greatest fence, then newer members of the workplace are great at finding alternate way rounds. So I think education, whether that be university based, whether that be business based, is essential, because if you can't get people's hearts and minds, then they will find an alternate way of doing things.
I totally agree. And I try to explain to the students and the lawyers I train as well that AI is there, it's a tool, it can be used, but understand what it can provide, what its limitations are, and don't let it substitute for your own critical thinking and analysis and creativity. Because at the end of the day, if you're too reliant on something for too long, ultimately you're depriving yourself of your own opportunity to grow and contribute. And it also could backfire in a big way, like when you talked about at the very beginning, where some lawyers have used AI citing cases that don't even exist.
Mm.
We've had some government reports where there's sources cited that aren't there, for example. It's too easy. And sometimes it's helpful, but as I say, what is AI? It's basically combing the internet to provide and package information in certain contexts. And if there's garbage in, there can be garbage out. There can be
Yeah.
quality. There can be quality too. I'm not saying that, but you got to be careful.
Yeah, wise words to end it on. I guess I'd just make one more point. Obviously, there are good things in AI too, really great use cases, I think. And it's important that any literacy program looks at the good as well as the risks. And to go on an old hobby horse, uh, training starts at the top as well. So we should be educating our boards and leaderships of the good things as well as the bad. I guess we've
100%
got to leave it there, have we, Eric?
completely in agreement. We can leave it there. I'm Eric Sinrod at Dwayne Morris. Thank you for joining us. I'm at ejsinrod at dwaynemorris.com. Wonderful to see you, Jonathan, as always.
Yeah, and you, Eric. I'm Jonathan Armstrong from the Southall Law. I think the kind people are going to put our email addresses along the bottom of the screen, and we'll link to some resources in the YouTube version. All that remains is to thank you for watching or listening, and we'll speak to you again in a few weeks.
Thank you.